What's going on, y'all? KMBest here. Let's talk about Marvel Snap's newest card, Namorita. Namorita is a 3/5 who, like her relatives Namor and Namora, keys off of being alone or seeing other things alone at a location. In Namorita's case, when she is alone at a location, the cards you draw get -1 cost. And this is not just the cards you draw for turn, it's the cards you draw at all. And that -1 cost is not temporary, it is permanent. It does stay there. So there is some upside to this card that is just 3/5 that's pretty good, that lets you cheat a little bit of energy. And largely, that's the feeling that I got from this card, is that I was never incredibly upset to see it. There was never a time where I was like, Namorita, oh, I hate that. It was more like, Namorita, oh, I might have a better thing to do, but I'm glad you're here. And I think that that is sort of where she's going to land. This is a card that feels pretty medium, a card that is solid, okay, and even has the potential to get a lot better. But what sticks out to me about her is her floor is honestly pretty high. She's not exactly in the copycat tier because she's not nearly as good as at being a card that can follow up an Iron Patriot for obvious reasons, and she has some anti-synergy with debris that makes her not exactly the best option for Supergiant stuff, even though I did try her there. And she is a card that has occasionally some things that make locations be a little bit awkward with her, but I was on the whole generally impressed with her as like a second or third option as a 3-cost card in a variety of different spaces. But I also was playing her in a bunch of decks that weren't really asking her to carry them. These were decks that had other things where the point output was coming from those cards, and her job was really to facilitate those things being a little bit easier. I think that this is the kind of card that I can envision in the future getting significantly better if certain things work out in certain ways, but it's also the kind of card that seems pretty okay right now, but doesn't give you an incredibly compelling reason to play it. And not giving you a pretty compelling reason to play it, that's something that actually matters in 2026 Marvel Snap, where you really have to evaluate, is this going to combine with other cards in a way that is extremely powerful, extremely strong, and let me do a bunch of really crazy stuff. And right now, Namorita is pretty good, but I don't think pretty good moves the needle in a lot of these lists. She feels like a card that can go in a bunch of decks, but is also to some degree replaceable in those decks. I still think that there's upside potential for her, a little bit more than I honestly thought there would be in a card like this, but right now I do think she codes as a little bit mid. Let's start with the boring stuff, which is I actually did feel like she was pretty solid in the Captain Carter combo list. I've not been a huge fan of Silver Surfer in these lists, and I've been trying out various stuff in that space. And one of the things that Namorita does in these lists that Silver Surfer simply cannot do, and other cards like Triton simply cannot do, is be a card I play on turn 3. The way this list tends to want to play out is you want to play a card on turn 3, and then later you want to start building up. And Namorita is mostly going to be your worst turn 3 play, but you really don't want to play things like Captain Carter or things like Maverick on turn 3. You have specific positioning things that you want from them. Captain Carter wants to be in the second space in a lane, so you can play a Maverick in the third and then Prodigy in the fourth. And you don't want to play Brood early, so you end up with a deck that has a shocking amount of cards that you really don't want to play really early in the game. And that is what Namorita has been supplementing here, I think. This is a sort of additional Hope Summers-y type card, although Hope Summers works better with how the deck wants to work, and you're typically going to prioritize Storm over this card pretty much every time you can. It just is nice to have a third card that I'm actually happy to get on the board, and sometimes she lets you do some really good stuff because the breakpoints between 3 and 2 are really meaningful. You're able to get additional energy some of the time as well. You have discounts with things like Mother Ascani, and it really opens up your range in ways that are not necessarily predictable, which is good because this deck tends toward predictability. Now, this is very much the 12th card, though, and I don't think it's a compelling reason to go pick up Namorita when what's really happening here is you're playing a very powerful Captain Carter combo deck, and you could very easily replace the Namorita here with any number of 3-cost cards that could be just as good. I think she's been very solid for me, but I don't think that this list is a super compelling reason to go pick her up and like make her meta. She's good here, but she is not the story. The small surfer lists actually want her a lot more because these are lists that are indexing a lot more towards turn 6 explosive plays and a lot farther away from I'm going to be an onboard combo deck. When comparing the two types of surfer deck, the one we just talked about with the stick is honestly a lot more like a deck that is trying to do like Jocasta Invisible Woman. That's very much the vibe of that deck where it's like, here's my combo, it is on the board, something is happening here. Whereas this deck is trying to weave in a little bit more reactivity. There is a Shadow King in here, a little bit more hand power on the final turn of the game between Sarah, Mother Ascani, and Namorita. There is just going to be a lot of hidden stuff, hidden information in your hand, and you're hoping that that hidden information and power makes up for the fact that you have less output than the other surfer lists. I think it's a very valid direction, to be honest with you. It's not my favorite thing in the world, but just being a good deck that does power well and has a Shadow King in it is a very solid thing to do. You're just going to have a lot less power than the combo versions. This is, though, a deck that actually benefits from Namorita in a real way. It is additive with your other cards that are discounting, where in the other version of Surfer, your discounts are cool, but they're not really making you get any better at doing what you do. This is actually helping your primary game plan of discounting and hand buffing and exploding on the final turn of the game. She is actually helpful in that regard. And I do think that there's something to be said for that. Like cards that you draw off Namorita. If they were 3, they get discounted to 2 off Namorita. You play a Sarah, she gets discounted to even 1. You're playing 1 cost 3s. It's not bad. Like there's something to be said for this being an actual long-term home for her, I think. I saw Dara messing around with a Kang version of the Techno-Organic Virus deck with Namorita in it, and I think that's a really solid way to go about it. Like, it's pretty hard to make a bad version of Techno-Organic Virus right here. The Kang stuff is very cool in terms of adding some cube equity to a deck that otherwise doesn't have a ton of it, and also some consistency to Gambit when you draw it, although you lose consistency on actually getting it out there. Some additional Quinjet synergy that I think is very cool. I actually kind of wonder about the Kang. Like, that's a card where it's like, if Kangs were 3-5, I think this would actually just maybe be busted. Since they're 3-4, it's like, oh, that's interesting, and I should look into it more. But I was actually pretty impressed with this list when he was playing it against me. I thought it was just like a really solid deck with a really great ability to cheat a bunch of stuff and play confusing game plans, and sometimes it clunked a little bit. Like, definitely this is a deck that keys off of Quinjet, and I'm not really sure how much I love playing Kang in my Techno-Organic Virus deck when what I really want to do is draw Techno-Organic Virus every single game. I don't know if all of the assumptions being made here add up, but I was a lot more impressed with this than I honestly thought I would be, and I do think it's worth giving Dara a shout out for it. Another creator deck I saw came from Binks, and this looks more like an anti-meta deck to me. A deck that is looking to leverage Namorita to just do some cool anti-meta powerful stuff, just good cards, super giant, some really cool stat sticks, some really strong and unique ways of approaching the game. To me, this looks the most like a good cards pile of any deck Binks has ever played. I hope he doesn't take offense to that, but there's just a lot of good cards in here, and you are trying to go mid-range for mid-range, band for band, with all the other people playing mid-range stuff right now, and use your disruption to prevent them from doing anything that's all that strong. One of the things that I thought was interesting in this list is just how good Killmonger is right now. Like, that struck me when I was seeing this list played and played against me, was that Killmonger was particularly powerful, and by the same token, Man-Thing is particularly powerful because there are just a lot of lists that are built on being more than the sum of their parts, a lot of small cost things that are getting bigger, and dealing with both of those in the ways that you can. It might look like anti-synergy, but really it's just 2 cards filling the same role, and I think that there's something to be said for that. This is a list that's looking to stack discounts in a similar way to the Surfer list. You have Zabu discounts and Namorita discounts and extra energy from potentially Kraglin and extra energy from Luna Snow. And so what you're trying to do here is just leverage powerful cards that would normally be out of the range of a mid-range deck's accessibility range to get those into the range of the kind of things that you can consistently access per game with your energy cheat and your additional ramp ability. I think it's a really interesting direction, to be honest with you. From Husky Puppies, we have a list that is built on Final Turn Surprise. It's honestly very reminiscent of a Gambit V-Hand list, but it's doing its points in a very different way. It's much more able to focus on two locations because you have not only the Mother Ascani Sasquatch stuff, but also very large werewolves and sages, which means that rather than attacking three locations, as is fairly common in the way that V-Hand tends to play out, especially if you're copying V-Hand herself, this is a deck that has the ability to pick and choose, but honestly, in my experience, is much more often going very tall in two. And that gives it a bit of a different profile because it can do some extremely big stuff. Mother Ascani Sage is sort of a quietly very powerful thing for decks to be accessing. One of the only decks that was really engaging with Mother Ascani Sage was the Ramatut Wong Agamotto deck, and I think it sort of fell under the radar because not a lot of people were engaging with that, but Mother Ascani Sage is a really powerful way to use Mother Ascani. That is a extremely powerful card to duplicate, and anytime you can stack additional discounts, that seems to be the role that Namorita is falling into. She is not very often going to be the only discount mechanism, but what she's going to try to do is like she'll take your threes to twos and then something else takes them to ones. And so you have her in these decks where you have, Majestic Wingbeat and Mother Ascani hitting the other side of the hand. You have Namorita hitting the cards you draw. And, sometimes that can actually work. It takes a lot of effort, but sometimes you can get one of the Namorita cards over to the other side of the hand by turn 5. It's pretty rare, but you can do it. And all of this is just Namorita sort of greasing the wheels. That's mostly what she's doing in a list like this, but you're super happy to do that. Another thing with Namorita that I want to point out is she's pretty okay with skills, because skills are effectively investing in points in some way while not actually staying at her location, which is another thing that Werewolf by Night is able to bring to the battlefield. You can use him to sort of backfill her location because, hey, look at that, he's over there now. But part of why you see Namorita decks sort of building like this is because in order to cover up for the fact you have like one card at the location every time, what you're doing a lot of the time is discounting a bunch of stuff such that you're going to fill that location up anyway. So you end up with a lot of incentives running the same direction with this card. Last up, I know I said I was optimistic for some kind of teched out version of the Venus deck. I tried a bunch of different stuff. Here's where I ended up. But honestly, this deck is good. The power output is good. This is a strong, powerful list. I don't think you can beat Gambit in a million years. And like, that's just sort of fundamentally what I ended up on, is like, I was beating everything I played that wasn't copying Gambit Horseman of Death. And then every time I came up against a V-Hand deck, they were just doing points more efficiently than me or gambiting a bunch of stuff. And it was just, they snapped with impunity and I had no ability to win those games. And so I like what this deck is doing, and I think Namorita's inclusion in it was like pretty solid. I quite enjoyed her. She was able to accelerate the next game plan in a meaningful way, especially when you don't draw your engines on curve. She makes it much better to draw your engines later because you can weave them into your curve without making major sacrifices. Like, she was good here. The deck had problems for me, but I was pretty happy with it such as it was. Like, yes, there's just a metagame issue of you're really, really cold to Gambit, but this was, I think, a deck that after I put the work into it, I felt pretty happy with how it was constructed. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal, and I'll see you in the next one.